You found the skeleton. How would you calculate that distance? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Hey there, YouTube, with Dapper Dinosaur here. We last left off with Pete Greer telling us the uncontroversial fact that tornadoes don't assemble houses, and then pretending that this was some kind of problem for modern science. I think he might be ready to go launch into a discussion about the second law of thermodynamics, in which he manages to not know anything about the second law. But let's find out together. Before we do, I want to thank Nebulin for this great art of me that's being used in this video.
Okay? And nobody would deny that, would they? If they were in their right mind, anyway.
No, because again, we watch houses get built, and they're built by people, unlike living things.
So then we need to look at this apple tree. Which one's actually more complex and well designed?
It doesn't matter, because no one has ever seen a construction crew or an analog thereof build an apple tree from the ground up according to blueprints. Apple trees grow themselves from stored patterns that themselves can be seen to vary naturally without any intentionality.
Well, I didn't see the house build itself. I said it did, but we knew it didn't. But that came from a seed. And inside that seed was a code. How'd that code get there? Did it just happen by chance and random processes?
We know how genes come about. This isn't a mystery. Mutations, drift, selection, and recombination. That's what we can see, and it is more than sufficient to explain apple trees. What we don't see is anyone creating apple trees from the ground up like we do with houses.
I don't think so. That tree, first of all, grew roots, because if it grew the leaves first, it would have died, because it wouldn't have had any way to get nutrients up there to feed it.
So there's a strong selection pressure for roots to grow down. Cool.
And it has a chlorophyll. It makes its own food.
Hey look, endosymbiosis, another mechanism of evolution. Isn't Pete supposed to be proposing problems for evolution?
And it has apples, which we eat.
Hey, a seed dispersal mechanism that allows animals to symbiotically spread the offspring of the tree. Not sure why that's a problem.
All those things are there, and they benefit us, and they're put there by God.
Well, the wild apple tree with tiny sour apples doesn't benefit people all that much. He's talking about domesticated trees, and the benefits to humans from them are largely the result of evolution directed by humans, not God, during historical times. The wild apple tree primarily benefits wildlife who spread its seeds and eat its nectar while pollinating. But since we have a naturalistic and non-miraculous explanation for the evolution of plants, the fact that they exist isn't really a problem for evolution. Pete is going to have to say why these things couldn't evolve, not simply state that they can't. Basically, this same argument could be made, and then the statement, so God can't be real, could be tagged onto it, and it would be just as effective.
And we see his design as manifest in that in a miraculous way.
I'm not aware of any part of the process of apple reproduction that requires a miracle.
And to believe that happened by chance and random processes would take a tremendous amount of faith.
Maybe, but evolution isn't just a chance process. So I'm not aware of anyone who thinks that apple trees came about because of random atoms flying around randomly, smashing together randomly. You think maybe he'll stop strawmanning evolution? I'm not going to hold my breath for it.
In Hebrews, it says every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Yep.
Look, if you want to say God is the ultimate necessary metaphysical being who grounds and creates reality or something like that, then fine, have fun. But there is no reason to think that just because apples exist, he had to directly make them via a miracle.
You're just going to be so much more amazed of God. I invite you to look at animals, look at the human body, take each system apart and see all the parts that make the system. Take each organ apart and see all the tissues that make the organs. Take all the tissues apart and see all the cells that make the tissues. And then they all put together and they work by themselves and with the other systems in our body. It's miraculous.
This argument basically comes down to cool things exist, therefore God. But the problem is that no one is disputing that cool things exist. If you want to conclude from them God, you have to actually make a logical bridge as to why they necessitate God. Otherwise, you're just pointing to things and saying, look, like a 1-year-old who just learned that they can make adults notice things by pointing and saying, look.
When I taught biology, I called it the miraculous human body, because you can't deny it's a miracle.
The human body is not a miracle. Oh, hey. Yes, I can. Pete, why would you lie to me like that?
Bet they do. We came from a bacteria, if that's the belief.
No, it's not. The common ancestor of humans and bacteria wasn't a bacterium, although it was a prokaryote since that's a grade, not a clade. Sure, you might think that this looks like a bacterium, but it probably lacked many of the things that today we associate with bacteria, like operons. No modern species is the ancestor of humans.
So in the biology books, they have a whole bunch of horrible stuff that we know is not true. Like this one says that we used to have a tail.
That is true enough. Every human used to have a tail. They all grow them in embryo.
You never had a tail. You had a backbone that extended past your body when you were first formed.
That is what a tail is, you goddamn moron. Don't worry, you also don't have a brain. You just have a big mass of neurons in your cranium. You don't have any teeth. You just have enamel-covered dentin set into your jaws. You think you're a vertebrate? You just have jointed, segmented bones protecting your spinal cord.
But then your body caught up with it and surpassed it, and it ended up being where it is today. It was never a tail.
So yeah, you did have a tail. No, it was just a post-anal extension of the spine. You know, the exact thing a tail is. But if I just say that humans are special boys and that it's not a tail, it's a dangleglorbin, for reasons, then yay, evolution is fake now.
And they say, of course, because we all had tails, that we came from a common ancestor. Nope.
Who, all humans? Because as far as I know, common ancestry for humans isn't disputed. If he means all tetrapods, well, their common embryological development is indeed evidence of common ancestry, because all tetrapods are built up as successive changes to the details of more and more fundamentally anatomy as you go back both in geological and ontological time. If they did not share common ancestry, there's no reason why they should all have such similar embryological development.
It says we had gill slits.
It doesn't say that, not even on the on-screen slide. It says gill pouches. And while I prefer pharyngeal arches, yes, humans and chicken and fish and frog embryos all have pharyngeal arches. But no, they are not gill slits.
Those gill slits, they don't have anything to do with respiration. It said it became our lungs.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
They don't become lungs. And if they did, they would have something to do with respiration. I now want to know what Pete is smoking and whether I can get some and turn it into an edible form since my lungs are bad as it is, and I don't need lots of extra smoke.
We know that's a false. We've known it for years, and it's in the biology book.
I don't even know what it is that he thinks is false that's still in the biology books. Does he think that biology books say that pharyngeal arches do have to do with respiration in humans? Because I doubt that they do say that.
It says, on this one, it says that each succeeding thing as we evolved added new information to the old information to become the new thing.
Does it? I doubt it, because there is no objective way to quantify information in organisms that we could say with certainty whether a turtle, a duck, a pig, or a human has more or less information than the others.
There's no known way to do that. Science has never observed useful information being added to the genome, and yet it's right there in the biology book, the one I was teaching back in the 90s.
Back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
Let me introduce you to the icefish, which, because of a gene duplication followed by subsequent mutations, managed to evolve a brand new antifreeze protein that allows it to exist in frigid environments. Seems to me like a brand new protein that didn't involve the loss of anything at all, and is brand new information, no matter how we might define it. Neat that.
It's horrible. It's misleading. It's a lie. And yet it's still there.
So far, nothing has been a lie from any of these textbooks. I'm less confident about that for things that Pete has said, but I'm not quite to the point where I think he couldn't possibly be colossally ignorant, as opposed to just being dishonest.
If I think about that too long, I never taught evolution in my classroom. I would talk about it and I would compare it with the other view. And I never got in trouble, thank goodness, but my principal was a Christian who helped me get creation materials.
So he was objectively bad at his job. I feel sorry for his students. He should have gotten in trouble for teaching anti-science nonsense in a science classroom.
And that's the special place that we live in here. So Werner Gitt, who is a creationist, said there's no known law of nature, no known process known to man, sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. He put $25,000 up and says, if you can disprove this statement, I'll give you $25,000. He's dead now, but he never had to pay anybody.
As a rule, such monetary challenges are publicity scams, with rules designed so that it would be impossible for anyone to win no matter how right they were or how much they actually demonstrated the thing that is said can't be demonstrated. Basically, this is done by having biased people judge if the challenge has been met and shifting the goalposts in the actual rules of the challenge, which most people won't bother to read. Anyway, I don't really care what gets said. Anything which can be encoded in a binary sequence, whether natural or not, whether created by intelligence or not, has information. So the spectrum of a star creates information. A mudslide creates information. The spin of a pulsar creates information. Information is created all the time by natural forces. If Pete wants to define information in some other way than Shannon information, he's welcome to. But until he does and then shows how his new definition is relevant to biology, and also precludes information from coming from natural, non-intelligent sources, this argument means as much as if he'd farted into a balloon and popped it in our faces. It's meaningless and odious.
We think that apes separated from humans about 5 million years ago.
No, humans never separated from apes. That's impossible. But humans and chimps split about 6 million years ago.
Although there's no fossil evidence of that period of separation.
You know, except for Sahelanthropus chadensis. But even accepting this, that estimation is primarily based on genetic molecular clock data, not fossils. So basically Dan is saying, yeah, people say the sky is blue, even though no one has any radio astronomy evidence of blue skies. Well, yeah, that wasn't really the basis on which the sky being blue was established.
So why are you saying it, that you think that? Why do you think that? What makes you think that when there's no evidence?
There is evidence based on known and measurable phylogenetic replacement rates and the well-sequenced genome of both Pan troglodytes and Homo sapiens. Basically, we can measure about how fast mutations accumulate in a population, then use the genetic similarity of chimps and humans to measure how long that amount of difference would take to accumulate, and you get about 6 million years.
Richard Leakey said he thinks that there's more evidence for humans appearing quickly than gradually.
Maybe that was reasonable 30 years ago, but we've come a long way. Check out these skulls, just for example.
This is Stephen Jay Gould. He's a famous evolutionist.
I'm not going to argue about what a man said in a book from more than 4 decades ago. Until Pete makes a point that isn't just quote-mining Stephen Jay Gould, we're skipping ahead. Oh, after, he also gives us a quote from someone else without a citation. So I don't even know if it's real, but since Pete won't give me a reason to think it is, I'll just assume it's not.
Here's some other inconsistencies.
Other? Bold to assume there have been any so far.
Second law of thermodynamics says everything's running down, not getting better.
No, it says that the amount of energy unavailable to do work in a technical physical sense will tend to increase or stay the same in an isolated system. Or that the number of quantum microstates that will be measured as the current macrostate of an isolated system will tend to increase or stay the same. The degree to which this corresponds to a human understanding of order is meaningless to nature.
All living things came from living things.
Sure, today maybe, but that's not a guarantee that it was always the case. And besides, he thinks Adam was made from a bunch of rock, not really a living thing. So I'm not sure why he's bothering making a point even he thinks is not true. For the first time with this one, I'm tending to lean towards maybe he's not just ignorant. Maybe he knows better, but I'm not there yet.
Is the law of biogenesis. We've never seen an exception to it. It's a law.
It's not a law, it's a general principle about modern life.
Evolution violates that. Cell theory is violated, that all living things are composed of cells.
Cell theory is about modern life, not all possible or all past life.
And cells come only from other cells.
Now.
Evolution violates that.
No.
That for every effect, like the universe, there's a cause that's bigger than the effect. That would be God that created the universe would have to be bigger than the universe, and he is.
You sure that's not nothing? Because I'm pretty sure that's nothing.
So it violates all of these other respected laws and theories of science.
It doesn't violate 3 of the 4, and the one it does violate isn't found anywhere in science, so Pete is 0 for 4.
So DNA is an extremely intricate information system that shows there has to be a purposeful intelligence to produce such an elegant system. So this is an old slide. We only had 340 gigabytes of memory back then, and we're way past that. But if you consider that that's what man's best effort at that time had produced that, and we thought we were really something. And somebody said, well, what about DNA? It's a little bit more compact than that. Well, how much? 5 billion times more compact than that. And so it's still billions of times more compact than anything we've ever come up with. They studied DNA to try to figure out how to get more compact systems. DNA is the area of research right now that if you're not up with it, it's exploding the knowledge of DNA, and all of it makes the evolutionary explanation become lower and lower and lower.
DNA is compact, therefore it can't evolve is a weird take, given that we can see it evolve.
Multifunctional genes, with another part of it that used to be junk DNA, when it turns on, it makes this gene code for something else.
Wait, is he arguing that neo-functionalization of junk DNA is a problem for evolution rather than an example of it?
And then another part of what used to be junk DNA would turn the same part and it'll code for something else. We're finding all this stuff out now. It's mind-blowing, and yet they'd still want to explain it away.
Okay, I feel like I must not be understanding his point, because it really sounds like he's saying that junk DNA mutating to become a gene promoter, which then establishes a new function, isn't evolution. But that really sounds like a cool example of evolution, not a reason evolution isn't real. If you think you know what he means, please let me know in the comments.
Since the density and complexity of the DNA encoded information is billions of times greater than man's present technology, we can conclude the coder of the DNA must be supremely intelligent.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
Okay? And is that a logical conclusion? I call that a logical conclusion.
Well, no one is going to accuse Pete Greer of being a follower of Sirach of Vulcan.
So evolution requires the addition of new genetic information. We have never seen the addition of new genetic information.
For which we still have no definition.
For our cousins, they call us, we're 3% different. Look how similar we are. We're only 3% different.
More like 1.2% different in alignable regions.
Well, the newest research has made it more like 30%.
Citation needed, amigo. I've never heard of a figure that high, even from that hack Tompkins, the only young Earth creationist I know of who's even trying to measure such things. And who got it wrong once because of a bad computer program, and then again because he forgot how to do basic high school arithmetic. Even he comes up with a difference about half of what Pete just reported here. I now think he's just lying. He didn't get that number from anywhere. He made it up, I'm fairly confident. I'd be happy to be wrong about it, but right now, the preponderance of the evidence is that Pete is a liar. If he happens to watch this and would like to dispute that, he's welcome to come on the channel.
Okay, so you can multiply this next figure by 10. That's 90 million differences in our DNA code. We haven't had enough time for that to happen since we supposedly diverged from our common ancestor.
Okay, so the human genome is about 6.4 billion base pairs long. Using the real numbers, not Pete's made-up ones, we get 76,800,000, but we need to divide that in half since it's chimps evolving too. So we get 38,400,000 differences between humans and chimps. So his numbers are off, but why is that number impossible?
So it's really 900 million differences, because we found out that when they made that comparison, they only took the parts that were similar, they didn't take the parts that were different. So it was skewed from the beginning. Surprise, surprise.
No, it's not 10 times higher. He means alignable, and the non-alignable regions are so because they are not sequence constrained, so they tend to have a higher accumulation rate, which is why they're non-alignable. And why are these sequences not constrained? Oh, because they are, by and large, not functional.
Another illusion based on false things. There's no spiral there. Those are all circles. Humans are a special creation, not a product of evolution. This is my last one for today, and it's the most important one for especially our young people to understand. that we are on the planet of the humans who believe they are related to apes.
Apes are mammals with very flexible shoulders, enclosed orbits, hands with opposable thumbs and flat nails instead of claws, nostrils that do not diverge, no tails, tricuspid molars, and enlarged brains. Seems like humans are in fact apes. Pete is welcome to try to formulate a definition of ape that doesn't include human and that doesn't rely on special pleading. Good luck to him. But I don't think he'll even attempt to do so.
If only it was science fiction. No. How do we believe that? Well, you go to any museum and they'll teach you that. This says we belong to the ape family. Why is that? Because we're a vertebrate. Well, you know, they believe I'm related to a tree too, even though it's not a vertebrate. But anyway.
Yeah, but both a tree and a human are eukaryotes, so point still stands.
That foot on the ape, their feet don't look like that. They're like that, just like their hands.
Their feet are just hands.
They got a gripping thing, that's correct.
A divergent big toe. But the actual degree of divergence in modern apes varies, and it also varies in fossil hominins, so I'm not sure how useful that is as a diagnostic feature of apes.
And so they put it next to the human, and then you're supposed to say, oh, look it, we're so similar. Obviously, that's my grandpa.
Pete got it right that it was cousin earlier, so why is he switching to ancestor now? Only reason I can think of is dishonesty. So while it took a long time for me to get there, I am now going to have to treat Pete as a dishonest actor, as that is where the preponderance of the evidence has unfortunately led me.
Well, this is what they actually found of Lucy, who's still the biggest one, you know.
Lucy certainly isn't the biggest or most complete hominin fossil found, so I don't even know what he's getting at. She is important for reasons to do with the history of science, but at this point, even if her existence were erased and all measurements based on her with her, it wouldn't really change anything because we now have so many other specimens.
And they say that we evolved from Lucy, and this is our ancestor.
Not really. She represents an anatomy that there's no reason to think ever existed if humans and other apes do not share common ancestry, but she herself isn't likely to have been ancestral to modern humans.
And that's what they found. So they take that, and what do they put in the museum for you to see? That. This is in St. Louis. A thinking, got a thought frozen in time. You can see it. You can see the whites of her eyes. You can't see that in those other two pictures I showed you. And a human hand. Okay, everything there is modified to dumb down humans a little bit and lift apes up a little bit. So you think that you came from that.
Nope, it's based not just on Lucy, but on the hundreds of other specimens of her kind that we found. And while no one saw her eye whites, white sclerae occur in all ape species.
That's in St. Louis. It's in the St. Louis Zoo. And remember, there was no hands or feet found.
On Lucy? No. On other Australopithecus finds? Yes.
But we have found hands and feet now of that kind of ape. Guess what? That, not human.
Wrong. The Dakika child, which has one of the most complete fossil feet of any Australopithecine, shows no significant divergence of the first metatarsal. Now, that doesn't mean Australopithecus feet were exactly like modern human feet. They likely were not, but they also were not simply chimpanzee feet, which, is rather what you would expect if chimpanzees and humans shared a common ancestor.
Grasping, okay? So David Minton says, the purpose of this display is not for education, but for indoctrination in evolutionary theory.
David Minton was a creationist who thought that Velociraptor was just a bird and who died of some sudden illness during a pandemic while working for an anti-vax organization. He is not an authority on this subject.
See the human foot? Okay, so they said, hey, you know what? We found out that they don't have human feet or hands. They got locking wrists for knuckle walking.
Australopithecus did seem to have a locking wrist mechanism, although the overall anatomy precludes knuckle walking, with the angle of the knees, shape of the pelvis, angle of the foramen magnum, and overall proportions making them obligate bipeds. So what was the locking wrist for? I don't know. Maybe it was useful for climbing. Maybe it was simply vestigial. But it certainly doesn't make Lucy a knuckle walker.
Well, zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct.
This is apparently from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, July 22, 1996 edition. I have no way to check up on this at this time from the primary source. The only other place I can find it is creationist websites. Given their tendency to simply steal quotes from each other and misattribute them, I have no idea what to do with this quote, what the actual context was, or what Bruce Carr was really meaning.
So we're going to parade all your school children past this exhibit and let them think that this had human hands and feet, so that they'll believe that they came from that or are related to it. That's the impression that we want to display at this museum.
It's the impression that's basically correct.
We don't want to display what's actually scientifically found. We want to create this impression. This agrees with our impression.
It does broadly reflect what was found, but assuming that Carr was not being misquoted, he runs a zoo, not a paleoanthropology department. I believe him when he says he can't update display models every time some new thing comes out, so even though the feet are too human-like, they're not really much more human-like than is appropriate. And yeah, it would be quite the hassle to have to remake a model every time some new measurement, like a scapular angle, comes out or something. The Ark Encounter certainly isn't going around updating their animals based on new findings.
This is in the Creation Museum, which is 40 miles from that ark that they built in Kentucky. And it's got a hologram of the bones with the dimensions and the size.
No, with wrong dimensions and an impossible pelvis.
And everything else of Lucy's bones. And so, you know, right now it's just got the arm. You press another button in the leg, and legs will show up and everything. But Lucy was about 4 foot tall, was definitely a knuckle-walking Australopithecus ape.
Friend of the channel Gutsick Gibbon has covered this better than I could, so here's a link to her coverage of this.
The Bible tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But will our kids ever learn that?
Yeah, they will, assuming kids go to this church and listen to sermons they just heard it. School teachers aren't the only source for kids to learn from. Here's a fun example. You ever hear a very small child curse? Yeah, chances are they didn't learn that from the school teacher.
Going to public school? No, they can't hear creation, see creation, or speak about the Creator. They're actually, in many places, not everywhere. We got some good Christian teachers here in Payson. I don't think would do that. But in many places, they do that. When I retired from the high school,
students in the United States are not barred from talking about God, religion, or creation. However, they can and should be told not to interrupt class with that when it's not the subject of class. We can't have a science class that gets interrupted by unsubstantiated no-ohs from students.
They do that. When I retired from the high school, there was a guy who was a young earth creationist who went in there, and I felt good about that. He quit after a year and a half, and this totally evolutionary person came in and would actually dock people points, is what one parent told me, if they spoke about it or tried to get extra credit for doing a creation-related project.
Giving a student extra credit or even full credit for spouting young earth creationism in science class is about as reasonable as giving someone full credit or extra credit for promoting flat earth in geography class.
I've had several students from high school come back and tell me my professor ridiculed me when I told him I believed the Bible. That's what's happening in our education system. That's why our youth are so confused and out there doing what they're doing in our culture today.
It was not my experience that people in college were ridiculed for believing the Bible. If that is happening, it absolutely should not, and if a documented case of that is brought to my attention, I will absolutely call it out and try to bring what attention to it I can. But on the other hand, if you believe demonstrably and absurdly wrong things about the basic reality we live in, like a flat or a young Earth, then being ridiculed for that isn't ideal, but it's also not surprising. Maybe Mr. Greer should just stop lying to convince children of absurd nonsense.
Because evolution, if you take it into your heart, is dangerous. I told my homeschool students when I taught them for 2 years, have it in your head, know it really well, but it doesn't go to your heart.
Two things. One, I can't imagine what it would mean to have evolution in your heart. Like, no one worships evolution or looks to it for guidance, except about, change in reproducing populations over time. Two, I don't think that Pete Greer is capable of teaching children to know evolution really well, because if this sermon is anything to go by, he clearly doesn't know it very well himself. In fact, I knew it better than he does when I was in high school.
The Bible's what it believes is what's in your heart. Don't swallow it, because then you'll learn things like this, that they're superior races.
That chart depicts a separate ancestry model in which humans evolved separately from earlier hominins in different parts of the globe. So the idea would be that, say, the Chinese people evolved from Chinese Homo erectus, while perhaps Europeans evolved from H. neanderthalensis, and maybe Africans from H. heidelbergensis. Now, this idea doesn't have to be racist, but its proponents usually were. But the thing is that this hasn't been in favor basically since Darwin, and its last proponents, who were in China, as far as I know, gave it up after DNA testing of local H. erectus specimens showed that the people of China were far closer to other H. sapiens individuals than they were to the local extinct H. erectus populations. In fact, it is evolutionary biology and population genetics that have demonstrated that at the genetic level, humans do not have separate races, and that the overt differences in eye, hair, and skin color and face shape that humans use to categorize each other into races are extremely superficial, and that under the skin, humans are all fundamentally similar, more so than many species.
And then people that believe that do things like this, dig up graves and send them to museums for profit.
Yeah, it's a big problem with archaeology as to whether you're grave robbing versus when you were doing legitimate archaeology. That's why nowadays archaeology has strict ethical guidelines and legal requirements. But also the slide on screen is about something far worse than grave robbing, so let's see if he talks about that.
I mean, this is just, I've got all kinds of examples on the illusion of human evolution talk that I gave.
Nope, I guess we're going to ignore that top-billed article about people being murdered in favor of grave desecration. Neither is okay, but I feel like murder is worse.
These guys all either believed were fans of Darwin or people who did what Darwin said.
No, we're not going to have guilt from association. Even if all the most evil people in the world accepted evolution, that wouldn't make it true or false.
So the Human Genome Project verified that. We found out that there's only 0.2 of 1% difference between any two people. So we're 99.8% similar. The most diverse people on the planet are 0.2% different.
Right, and that's what those kids Pete is so worried about are going to learn in school, because that's what the science is. So all this talk about learning about racism because of evolution is nonsense, and he's telling us here.
What about what we call racial characteristics? 0.012 of 1%, 12 thousandths of a percent different. There are no races. We're all humankind.
Hey, Pete and I agree on something. That's nice.
Going back to that quote from Gould, all of that racial stuff is just our culture. It's not anything to do with actually being different biologically. We're all one race.
So who thinks he's about to be balanced and fair and go into all the biblical passages that were used to defend slavery and racism, like the curse of Ham, for example? I'm not holding my breath. I'll just say that while the history of evolutionary biology is full of racists, the history of Bible-believing Christians is also full of racists. And while I'm not going to get into a Richard measuring contest over who is the worst racist in history, I'll just say that pointing out past racism in science as a reason to reject it without pointing out the historical and present problems with racism in your own camp is intellectually dishonest. After this, he goes on about how Christians shouldn't marry or date non-Christians. I don't care what Christians do with their dating lives as long as it's consensual all around. After that, it's just preaching and telling people that if they aren't Christians, it's because they know better, but then decided not to, then God confused them or something like that. And then that's it. He's done arguing about science and spends the rest of his time on exegetical stuff and telling us which creationist websites he thinks are trustworthy. Well, thank you for coming on this journey with me. I set out with this series to hear what John Q. Public Creationist hears coming from the stage, I guess? Side note, if someone knows the name for the raised part of a Protestant church, let me know. I know Catholics and Orthodox call that the sanctuary, but as far as I know, Protestants use that for the whole room, including what those churches would call the nave. Anyway, if this is anything to go by, then on the ground in church, creationism hasn't progressed much past Canthovind, which might explain why he still has a following despite being so wrong about so much that even other creationists call him out on it. Or at least they did before it became clear that, independent of his inane takes on science, he's also a reprehensible piece of shit who beats his wives and children, keeps the company of sex offenders whose victims were children, and who, despite saying that homosexuals should be executed, may just be engaging in some naughtiness on that front. I find that to be rather sad, but I guess I'm not really surprised. Well, if you stuck with me this long, thank you very much. Please remember to do all the YouTube stuff such as liking the video, commenting, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you're always notified when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. I just want to take a moment to thank all my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above: Van Tovind, Denny5252, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Chris Love, Landon Knoll, Sphincter of Doom, Star Runner, and Patrick Dennis. It's because of my channel members and patrons that this channel can keep on going at the blistering pace of 2 to 3 and almost always 3 uploads per week. And because I do run this channel at a slight loss, it is very important that anyone who can afford to and really likes my content, please do consider joining the Patreon or joining the channel with the link below. Patreon link is in the description. On Patreon, you can join at a 10% discount if you join for an annual subscription. And if for some reason you can't afford it, or an annual or monthly pledge isn't for you, there are always other ways to help out the channel. There's an Amazon wishlist linked in the description. There's also a merch store full of almost everything that Teespring makes.